Welcome to another episode of Michigan Tech's Husky Hour. In this episode of Husky Hour, Dayna and a panel of guests talk about study habits and staying motivated. Learn how to approach your study sessions effectively, how to balance studying with your other duties, and how to stay motivated when faced with a final exam or large project. Enjoy!
Hi everybody, I'm Hannah. I'm one of the student interns this semester at Center for Student Mental Health and Wellbeing.
I'm Michael Maurer. I'm a grad student here at Michigan Tech. I did my undergrad here as well, so I've been part of the Michigan Tech community since 2008. So I've been here a while, and I've had a long time as a student. Currently, I'm working on my PhD in the EE department.
My name is Grace Ojala. I'm a third-year undergraduate geophysics and anthropology major.
My name is Mike Meyer. Many of you, if you don't know me yet, will know me as the guy who sends all the surveys at the end of the term.
So in terms of study habits, I kind of wanted to go through and kind of get a sense of maybe some things that students can do and put in their tool belt. And I was wondering if you guys had any recommendations for good places on or off campus that are good for studying, quiet, is it peaceful, that kind of thing.
In my undergraduate time, I spent a lot of time studying in the library in the rooms that you can book. They're very quiet. They're on campus. They're convenient. And other than right at finals time, there's almost always some rooms open. So scheduling was pretty easy. As a graduate student, I'm lucky enough to have my own office at this point. So I do most of my studying in there because that's a nice quiet space. But what I've found about spaces, at least personally, and this is something that's come up a lot this semester for me, is trying to work from home. You're not always in that study or that research or whatever you're doing mindset. So trying to separate or have a dedicated spot to do your studying, I have found really helps me in the past.
It's been a long time since I had to find places to study on campus, and I've had an office for a long time. But I had a roommate that actually kept what he called a distraction box. And every time he would find something that pulled him away from his studying, he would put it in the distraction box and close it up, and he couldn't touch it for a week. So I agree with Michael's assertion that you got to find a place and clear it of distractions. And it's probably easier to do that when you're not sort of in the space you live in or occupy. Things like your roommate going into the distraction box is pretty unworkable. So I would encourage you to pack your stuff and sort of set out and find a place that works for you. The library's good. I think there's lots of other places on campus, from the upstairs of the Union this semester, if you haven't discovered that, to small niche places in the hallways of Fisher or over in Dow. So find a place that works for you and that you like, that you feel good about, and bring your stuff and take up residence.
Yeah, definitely to echo that, I definitely recommend finding a spot in your home department. If I'm a geophysics major, my department has the Dow atrium, which is, you might have been there on a tour or something. It's the room in Dow overlooking the portage with the huge windows where you can see the whole portage, and that's a beautiful spot to study. And it's a good place to study too, because a lot of times other people from my classes will be popping in, so we can compare notes and homework and whatnot. So I definitely recommend finding a spot in your department like that, because usually most departments have little kind of nooks like Fisher does, where you could, with a table or two, you could study at.
Yeah, I just want to kind of echo that space is so important with studying, just like with many of our other habits. Like, you may have heard that you shouldn't read in your bed before you're trying to fall asleep because it might be harder to fall asleep, or you might get sleepy while you're reading. Same thing, like if you eat every time you sit on your couch to watch TV, you're probably going to be hungry every time you sit on your couch. So think about kind of training up your study space muscle. Train yourself for high quality studying in the same place or the same types of places over and over again. And you might start with shorter increments of time to build that up and to create that habit over time. And obviously some spaces are easier than others to do that, but I know sometimes we're limited, or you might be quarantined for a while, or in isolation. You may have to be in your room in a dorm. So, are there little sections of your dorm room that you can partition off and you literally don't do anything other than your work in that space? Can you create some little mini environments? it may not be ideal or your first choice, but it might just work for you to kind of trick your brain into noticing it's work time.
So kind of to build on what we were just talking about, I was wondering if any of you had any tips or tricks to studying. I know Mike just said, your little box, you put things there, don't have your distractions. So yeah, does anybody have any little building blocks for that?
So I'll build on something Dayna said, which is scheduling time. And I think a lot of students are not aware that us crazy professors really do expect students to spend 2 to 3 hours outside of class for every hour you're inside of class. And it's pretty stunning when you look at the national statistics. We did a survey a few years ago here at Michigan Tech, and the average student studied about 17 hours a week, which is really good when you consider the national average is about 12. But if you ask the typical prof, they will expect that students are studying more like 30. So my advice to you would be to schedule X number of hours, at least a couple hours for every class that you have sometime in there. Schedule them and say, I'm going to study physics during, or do physics homework or do physics related something or other during this time. Keep it in short blocks, like Dayna said. So, maybe for physics, instead of 2 hours, it's 4 25-minute blocks with a break in between. But schedule the time. And if you don't need it, go back, review, do some things that you need to do, and then feel like you got a break, but don't not schedule the time, because you probably need that time and you're going to find yourself buried if you don't put it in a little on Monday and a little on Wednesday and a little on Friday, as opposed to waiting until the exam comes and you have 14 hours studying to do.
Kind of on that same thought, I found that getting a routine going. So even if you always study in the middle of the day between these two classes when you're in school mode, I found that helped me a lot more than just figuring out what I had to do every night and then trying to figure it out at the last minute. So if you get into a routine of, this is when I sit down and do all my schoolwork, and then I have, after 7 p.m. is for myself or something like that, I found that really helps and keeps me on track when I'm sitting down to study. I'm used to studying at that time then.
Going off that a little bit, something that I've found super helpful this semester, I'm not sure if it'll work for everyone, but planning your week out in advance. So saying on Tuesday, I'll work on this class, Wednesday, I'll work on this class. And so knowing what you have to get done in that day is a lot better than having it kind of spinning around in your head, like trying to remember, oh, what do I have to do? Like what homework is due, what not. So just like planning everything out in a week in advance, it makes everything super helpful. And like kind of going off that, keeping a planner or Google Calendar, or even just like a Word document with a list of things is way easier than trying to remember it all in your head.
Yeah, I mean, progress monitoring is one of the key ingredients for motivation too. So if you're monitoring your progress and keeping task lists and having check boxes, whether it's super visual, like a whiteboard right next to your desk, or, electronically using like Google Tasks, that's a great way to monitor your progress and keep yourself a little bit motivated. And just kind of circling back to what Mike was saying about breaking things up into chunks and smaller bits of time, one of the things that I often talk to students about is like, hey, remember your high school teachers? They were all educated on the ways that people learn best. And that's what all of their training was about. So if you think about high school classes, like maybe having a warm-up activity and different activities throughout the class, that were different types of things. So you might be writing for a while and then reading and then creating a PowerPoint. Those are actually all just study activities. That's how you learn. And so creating your own study hour that models kind of what a high school class was can be a really great strategy, because, your professors here are great. Some of them are super interested in the educational pieces, but some of them are more focused on the research side, and they're just giving you the information. You have to kind of figure out what activities will help you learn best. So, I definitely encourage you to think about some of that stuff and do some of those extra activities for yourself. It might make it a little easier to motivate yourself to study if you're like, I'm going to make a PowerPoint teaching somebody else about my physics class, instead of just like I'm going to go stare at it until it becomes part of my brain.
That active learning piece is really important. And so the research on how you learn things actually has to do with output more than input. So for instance, one of the most famous studies I can tell you about was a testing study where they had students read stuff and take a test 3 times, read stuff once, take a test 3 times, read stuff twice and take a test twice, read stuff 3 times and take a test once. And ironically, the reading it once and taking a test 3 times people actually remembered it best, because it was about them doing something. It was about them testing themselves, right? So anything you can do that is an output, telling somebody else about it, writing about it, doing something that's not just passive soaking it in, but actually output, is going to be probably better for your retention. It takes more energy to do, but it's going to be much better for retention. And then I'll just throw in one other thing. At the risk of sounding like a hard nose with my 30-hour-a-week commitment, one of the things that I find I have to do, and I think many students have to do, is schedule time for downtime, for recreation. For me, that looks like exercise. For different people, there are different things. But if you don't recharge your brain and you don't give it a chance to recover, all of that studying at some point just drives you into a very non-productive state. So I think it's important that not only do you schedule work time, but you also schedule playtime.
Yeah, I think so. And that's kind of studying on top of the homework that they're assigning too. I think that's one thing I certainly forgot about a lot in undergrad, was that a lot of my learning had to be my own studying. And I often waited until like, oh, I've got an exam, I guess I'll study the day before. But really it would be, spreading that out equally throughout every week is the best strategy.
And again, evidence is that 3 half-hour chunks are better than 1 1.5-hour chunk, right? Especially if there's some space between them. So if you do what Dayna suggested, and I'm going to do a half-hour of physics, then I'm going to do a half-hour of something else and a half-hour of something else, and then I'm going to come back and do another half-hour of physics. That spaced practice is likely to be better.
Yeah, and if you space that out, kind of circling back to Mike's comment about self-care here, we got to recharge those batteries. We know some of our batteries are going to be a little bit low this semester, like our social batteries, since we're restricted in a lot of ways. So keep everything else full, because when you have full power, you can handle some of the tougher stuff much better. You wouldn't, if you're an athlete and you've got a marathon coming up, you wouldn't run 20 miles the day before you have a marathon, because you're going to be starting your marathon at 70% instead of 100%. So really prioritize that sleep and exercise and nutrition, and that's all time where subconsciously your brain is organizing and filing that information away and putting it in your long-term memory. So if you're breaking things up into chunks, your brain can process that and put it in the right filing cabinet there.
If you have ever heard, I know one of the favorite things that college students, tech students in particular, say, sleep, social life, grades, pick 2, right? If you pick not sleep, the other 2 grades aren't going to work, because there's really good evidence that you cannot process long-term memories without sleep. And so if you're not getting regular good sleep, and eating, and as Dayna said, taking care of yourself, your grades are sooner or later gonna pay the price, or at least your long-term learning is. You might get through and cram for the test and it might work, but the next semester might be harder because of it. So the better you can build that self-care into your routine, it's actually a good thing for your learning. It's not pick 2, it's you got to do them all.
I kind of wanted to circle back to something that was said earlier and dig deeper on it, and that would be study habits. How do we build them? How do you maintain them? It's not an easy task at all. Sometimes we have to change them too, depending on the class, find what works best. And I think that would be helpful for students to kind of get some other ideas of what other people are doing.
One thing that I've always found helpful is having a study buddy. So if it's someone who is in the class with you, that's great, because then you can bounce ideas off each other. teach each other concepts, which is helpful for both of you because then you get the reinforcement of teaching it and they get to learn something they missed in class. But even if you don't have, even if you don't, like right now when you can't meet up with people or like other times when you don't know anyone in the class, still just studying in the same room as someone else and like telling each other, okay, we're not going to talk for the next half hour and we're just going to study. And then after the half hour, we'll take a break and we'll chat or something. Or like holding each other accountable for not looking at your phones or whatever. That's always super helpful, I found.
Yeah, I'm going to echo that. If you find someone to study with, it goes a lot easier. Kind of my process in undergrad, my first 2 years, I didn't do that great with studying. My third and fourth years, I shifted how I studied and I started studying with a group. Some of the people in the group luckily had good study habits and I was able to learn from them. So if you have a friend who's really good at studying, see if they're willing to let you sit by them while they study and you can kind of mirror what they're doing and that can help you go a long way just to learn off of what your friend's doing and what works for them.
Yeah, I'll add too. I know those are both social examples and that can be harder. You know, I know we've had a lot of students that don't know how to make those connections right now. You know, it might be sending a message to people on chat while you're in class. It could be asking your professor, hey, you know, would you send out an email or your TA, you know, see if anybody's interested in a study group. Have you had anybody else who's interested? Because I think, you know, we've had this question over and over again and people just don't know how to connect with each other. So if you're willing to email somebody else, they're probably really happy because they were thinking, I don't know how to email anybody else. So taking that first step is great. To switch subjects here and go back to Hannah's question on how do you build study habits, some of what everybody has said has been great. Like you are going to have to figure out different things for different classes, and it may vary. Like some of your friends might like a different way of studying than you, and so you have to try out different things. So having that open mindset of I'm going to try different things and then maybe stick with some things through some hardship, because studying is never going to be fun. So we have to recognize that, and that, you know, I'm going to get through this, and I'm tough enough and I'm smart enough and I'm committed to doing this, you know, and there will be joy and satisfaction from completing what I set out to do. But it's different than like just going and hanging out with friends or having fun in other ways. But also started out like you're building a muscle. So you've got to build this habit from the ground up. You know, if you're having trouble sitting and watching an hour-long video and you really can't make it past 5 or 6 minutes without getting distracted, then start out watching 5 or 6 minute chunks. Then see if you can make it to 8-minute chunks. See if you can build it, you know, day by day, making it a little bit longer so that, you know, generally you can get into that study habit where you're spending 30 to 60 minutes of high quality time on something. And beyond that, you really are going to have breaks in between.
And on that note, I would examine and question everything that you do. So I told you I teach physics to non-engineers, right? And one of the things, a lot of my students are life science majors. So a lot of what happens in the first few weeks of my class is that I have people who get very frustrated because the way they studied their biology class, especially anatomy and physiology in high school and that kind of stuff, totally does not work in my physics class. It's a totally different deal. So what that looks like specific to me is that people come in and they've highlighted things in their textbook and they've done a lot of reading and they've taken beautiful notes with tabs in them and all kinds of other stuff. And I ask them, what do you think this first test was about? And they have a long list of all the different concepts. And I say, the first test was about 3 things. It was about Newton's laws. That's it. And that's what you needed to know. And then the rest was just practice, right? And doing problems, right? And it's a totally different way of thinking. So even if you sort of have a way that you think studying works for you, part of what you're running into here is different disciplines where different practices, different studies skills are going to be needed. So talk with your the learning center coaches or your roommate or your prof or somebody, and they can sometimes give you suggestions about, well, when you take notes in my class, this might work better. Or if you take, when you practice, this is how you want to spend your time getting ready for the exam, right? Or if you're going to build a formula sheet, here's the kind of thing that you can do. Or if you want to know which concepts are going to be important, here's how you can tell, right? And really that's what we're trying to teach you, I think, here at Michigan Tech, is how do I take this sort of new thing, maybe in a new way of thinking that I haven't learned before, and how do I tackle it and make it my own, right? And it's going to be a whole different bunch of skills. So don't be afraid to try something new. And if you're not sure what to try, keep asking until you find somebody who can make a suggestion.
And just to kind of build off that, I think that asking yourself and checking in is so important. So, I am not a planner person, and so I just thought I'm not good at organizing things, and like no planning system is ever really going to be for me. And so instead of examining like what about a planner wasn't working for me, I just kind of said this whole practice isn't working for me. In fact, I really like doing to-do lists, and I don't like them in a planner. I like them like on a piece of notebook paper right near me. But, as you try things out, ask yourself, why isn't this working for me? When you get to something where you're like, before you abandon it, it might just be change it a little bit. Change your environment, change the color of pen you're writing in. It could be really small things like that that make a big difference. So one of the other questions that kind of came up when we talk about like motivation is, what are some ways to help get other people around you motivated? So I know we talked about finding study buddies, but like, if you're with your roommates or other people who are maybe feeling like a drag on you, how can you start some of those conversations or get other people to add with, like join your group or do the things that you need them to do to help you stay motivated?
So I guess I'll take a shot at this. I think, part of it is that there are lots of people at Michigan Tech, and finding the right people is part of it. But if you have people and you need to change their habits, people are motivated when they get to participate, right? So instead of saying, we need to study, sit down and be quiet for a half an hour, right? Maybe it's a conversation over dinner that goes like, I really have to study tonight. How can we make this happen, right? How can I help you? How can you help me? And let's talk about how I can get 2 hours of studying in tonight productively while you're in the same room I am. And maybe you can make, some of the things that Grace talked about in terms of holding each other accountable. Maybe you can make that a game, but maybe it's, I'll leave the room for an hour so you can have quiet space, and then you'll leave the room, and I'm going to go for a run or do something else, and then I'm going to come back and give you an hour of quiet space, right? So having that conversation about what you need and asking for their suggestions, I think can help everybody get better at this if you state the goal of, I really need to study.
I think it also depends on whether or not the person you're trying to help get motivated is like, if they want to be motivated. So if it's your friend and you're both really low on motivation, it's at the end of the semester, kind of coming up with rewards for the two of you if really helps. So saying like, okay, we're going to get 2 30-minute chunks of time of studying in, and then we can watch an episode of this TV show, or then we can make hot chocolate. That helps too.
Yeah, I love that suggestion. Another fundamental piece of motivation that I talk about and change is immediate rewards are super important, and we're probably missing some of those since we can't be in person with other people and like have immediate reactions to things on Zoom or things like that. But having a buddy that you can plan some rewards with, or just even making rewards for yourself, and trying to make some healthy rewards, a choice of rewards, so that every time you complete something, you have different options to choose for how you reward yourself.
Husky Hour is brought to you by the Center for Student Mental Health and Well-Being. Visit mtu.edu/well-being for more information about programs, events, and workshops. Thanks for listening.